You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are here in our second week discussing Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival. It's all about crime. It is our local crime fiction festival, and if you missed last week's episode talking about justice and the big themes of the festival, you can go catch that up on the podcast. This week, however, is just a bit of a fun hangout. Gonna talk with some of our best friends here in the Australian murder mystery community, talk a little bit about what that community means to everyone, and a couple of the great fun panels that we have. I'm going to sort of launch this off a little bit with the Takes All Sorts panel, as it was our most, I guess, middle-of-the-road murder mystery panel. Not to say that it was middle-of-the-road in terms of quality, but it hits right down the line. If you're unfamiliar with the crime fiction festival scene, go find what your local festival is. As I said, Bad Sydney is ours, and thank you so much to the festival for providing us with tickets, which allowed us to do all of these interviews, come up with all of these questions, and to all of the publishers who may or may not have sent books across the course of the year. It is in their graces that we're able to do this. Now let's get to that Takes All Sorts panel. This was the discussion facilitated by Sue Turnbull from the Bad Board and very experienced crime reviewer here in Sydney. Talking to Solari Gentle, a good friend of the show, Amanda Hampson, who has written the Tea Lady series, just speaking straight to my heart with the golden age murder mystery stylings of feminist icons, and David Wish Wilson with his novel Cutler, looking into the world of fishing drama, I suppose, and the environmental and ecological concerns that come with that. We're talking fun, we're talking crime fiction this week, so you know I have to kick it off with Solari. Now, Sue Turnbull opened this panel by asking Solari to describe her writing style, which, considering it took her 3 metafiction novels to get close to describing it in long form, was very curious to see how we could package that answer up into 2 minutes.
That's true, and it's really hard to do it from the inside because you write out into the world. So then having to turn around and look inward is tricky in and of itself. But I think I write the way I speak, and I think I write with an eye for the absurd, and I bring that out to the front, and I play with it. So that's generally my style. And if I'm ever choosing between a dramatic, moving moment and a punchline, I choose the punchline.
Well, and I think one of the other really interesting things too is particularly the way that you move, like, defined roller coaster of a character becomes safe, and then suddenly, very suddenly, they are no longer safe anymore.
And, that's probably the definition of a thriller, which we also talked about. And, I mean, because we've talked about this before, I don't plot.
Yeah.
So I have no idea it's coming either. So it's very sudden for me too. It's like, what just happened there? But it's just part of the story, I think. And it's how life works too, I think.
Solari Gentle there, author of The Mystery Writer and also the purveyor of the Solari Gentle Award for the best novel each year on Death of the Reader, which she has not won every time, just for the record. But it's thanks to her support that we sort of have that award and the Golden Dance Pants it's associated with. Now, Solari's first foray into crime fiction was through her Roland Sinclair series, which is ostensibly cozy crime, even though she put him through unjust terror at times to solve some of those cases. It's been really exciting seeing this new wave of Golden Age-inspired cozy crime fiction coming up with writers like On the Newest Edge and the Danger Award winner for this year, Amanda Hampson, and her series, The Tea Ladies.
If I want to read about violence and people being horrible to each other, I can read The Guardian. So I would never write anything, for example, that had pedophiles or sexual assault. I think it's a time that crime novels can offer an escape. I think that there is a sort of a frisson between the reader and the writer that says, I'm going to take you on an adventure, it'll be good against evil, but it's all going to come out well. The role of the amateur detective, as W.H. Auden says, is to restore the state of grace. And I think we really need a bit of restoration at this particular time.
Well, also one of the things that was really interesting on the Takes All Sorts panel today was you talking about this idea that the book is still very political, and both books have that strong message-driven bent underneath what is still a cozy crime. Does that feel different in some ways, the sort of politics that you feel you can and can't include in the book?
Well, it's funny because a lot of the things in the book might not be noticeable to men. But, for example, in The Cryptic Clue, one of my favourite lines that audiences all burst out laughing about is that the tea ladies have to go out in the night to make a rescue of this young woman, and there's a man present, and he says, "I'll come with you." And Hazel says to him, "You better stay here. This could be dangerous." Now, the women in the audience will always burst out laughing because we have observed 100 years of film where women have to stay home while men do interesting things. Yeah. So there are lots of things that I think you need to be a woman of my particular era to realise that these anomalies are there. So I'm not screaming and shouting and bra burning. I'm just inverting things in a way that older women just find amusing because they recognise them.
Well, and it's also so interesting in the cozy crime space because writers of Agatha Christie's ilk, like Dorothy L. Sayers, so often wrote against that sort of subtle feminism. And so interesting seeing those sorts of books portrayed with that identity flipped on its head. Do you find yourself reading older crime fiction differently through that lens of the sort of subtle feminism you were talking about on the panel?
Yes, because I make my characters probably ahead of their time in their thinking. I absolutely love old movies, 1950s movies, Katharine Hepburn, Audrey Hepburn, but really you look at them now and, the patriarchy is stomping all over them. All the men just want to be free and be manly and do whatever they want. All the women are just desperate to be married to them. There is no rhyme or reason. You can even see that the scriptwriters are all men because women just say stupid things all the time. They might say something a little bit, they want to be independent, but they don't really mean it. Yeah. They'd really just want to be married.
Well, one of the most powerful examples we came across recently on our program was Agatha Christie's The Caribbean Mystery, because in the book, all of the men are portrayed as rather suave and in charge, and it's all about all of these couples in this island resort. But then the BBC adaptation, I think it was, with Joan Hickson, all of the men are portrayed as so creepy and lurid, but the text is exactly the same. And it was so fascinating seeing that reinterpretation without the writers actually having to do any work other than just make them dress a bit differently, kind of carry themselves physically a bit differently in place of the narration.
That is so fascinating. See, that makes me want to read the book and watch the movie or the series because there is so much subtlety to it. And look, I was born in 1954. Most of my generation are so brainwashed by the patriarchy, they actually do not realise that they have these particular views. They still are in the mind thinking of, well, what were you wearing? What did you say? They just, it was just a very powerful movement that repressed women for so long. So I just like to have my tea ladies show little sparks where people go, oh, yeah, that is a little bit odd. In the 60s, women in most jobs, like government jobs, had to leave when they got married. Now, I know from my experience, if you were a younger writer, you might have women complaining about that. But we didn't complain. We didn't know any different. Women got married, they just didn't wear their wedding ring to work. They didn't tell the bosses they were married. So there was a huge acceptance. If, for example, men used to make disgusting jokes about women in social groups.
Well, used to.
Yeah, okay. I'm hoping it stopped. If you were to not laugh, you would become the target of that joke 100% of the time. Somebody would say, didn't you get it? And then you'd say, well, and I've had this experience, I just didn't think it was funny. And then you would be portrayed as somebody who was prudish, didn't know how to have a laugh. It was so disrespectful to women. But we had no voice. And you wouldn't complain about sex pests. We didn't even have that term. It was just normal. But it's not normal. We know now it's not normal and it wasn't fair, and the fact that we couldn't do anything about it. So, I'd just love to have a little bit of fun with that without making it serious. Just freshen it up a bit, I guess.
Amanda Hampson there, author of the Tea Ladies mystery series, talking about the way that she has sort of looked to evolve the cozy mystery genre. I particularly really love the way that Amanda has sort of embedded her mysteries in history, the latest one sort of covering the way that the Sydney Opera House was built, and also featuring these tea ladies who were renowned in these communities that just couldn't exist anymore. I was talking with Dr. Kate Evans from ABC Radio National's The Bookshelf about how the terrace at the ABC is still named after their tea ladies from an era that is now long gone. You are listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here with you. We are talking Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival, and right now the Takes All Sorts panel. We'll be back with more of that in just a second. Stick around on your Murder Mystery World Tour. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. We are talking Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival, and we were just having a chat about the Takes All Sorts panel. On that panel, Solari Gentill, Amanda Hampson, and David Wish Wilson, talking with Sue Turnbull. It was a panel all about the variety of crime fiction we get and how it covers so many different avenues, from the craziness of Solari's The Mystery Writer, the classic mystery shavings of Amanda Hampson's The Tea Ladies, and also the odd, thrillerish, journalistic bent of David Wish Wilson's Cutler. Now, I didn't get the chance to talk with David about Cutler, but it's a novel that delves into the fishing industry, the way that it plays with all of the facets going on there, shaping this political behemoth, along with the drama of this organized crime sort of going on in the background, or sometimes foreground. And I was really fascinated by David's point, talking about how, in many ways, he does the acts of a journalist, but because he says it's for fiction, he feels that people actually say more. And one of the really exciting things about seeing Cutler, a book that it is about this fishing industry and perhaps its excess, is that he was not the only author at the festival who had covered that topic. In the hallowed halls of fishing industry crime fiction is also Alan Carter with his latest novel, Prize Catch. We heard a little bit about Prize Catch at Terra Australis when we were in Tasmania at the end of last year, and one of the things that really struck me as odd is that this book deals with both the fishing industry and war crimes and the journalism thereof.
My two main source references for Prize Catch were Mark Willis's Rogue Forces non-fiction book about the Australian SAS and war crimes allegations, along with Richard Flanagan's book Toxic about the salmon industry, both very, very different subjects. And then it was trying to find a way of knitting them together. But what did knit them together was this idea of untouchability, entitlement. And you can find that among a group of young, tough guys in Afghanistan who've been given a license to kill right away up the food chain, or be it business people in Tasmania who are part of the Old Boys Club and have been given a license to pollute. Either way, it comes down to a sense of, I am allowed to do this, I am untouchable. And that's what knits the two together.
And thinking back on what Amanda was saying before about the Tea Ladies mysteries and the way that the patriarchy has sort of had this position of untouchability, it's really interesting that this theme sort of drags itself through crime fiction. If you've read Solari Gentill's The Mystery Writer, you can sort of also appreciate the untouchability of the secret villain in that novel, which is such an interesting through line when we look at modern crime fiction and the villains that we have compared to the much more tangible, direct villains that we often associate with classic crime fiction. The other really interesting thing, going back to that comment from David Wish Wilson about how purporting to tell a fictional story made people open up about things in a way that they wouldn't if he was there telling a journalistic story, still also shows this audacity in some ways that you can't touch these things because they are relayed through fiction. It's almost unsettling in a way. And one of the reasons it's unsettling is because Alan's panel in particular was talking about all crime being local and how the characters reflect the communities they're in, but also sort of the global nature of some of these issues that we start to deal with crime fiction.
It's a bit of a let-off for me writing about a place as an outsider, because both in Fremantle and in New Zealand, I was an outsider. So it gives me license to get things wrong because I can blame it on the characters being outsiders and not knowing. I've stepped into the danger zone in Tasmania because 2 out of the 3 main characters are actually locals, and I can't allow them to be wrong about how somebody might think about a situation in that part of Tasmania, what you can see from different angles down the street or on a mountain. I mean, that's why it's taken me 3 or 4 years to get the nerve up to write a book in Tasmania, really.
And going with that idea of the global nature of our characters and writing people who have been displaced, one of the other authors on that panel was Natalie Conyer, talking about her recently released Shadow City, featuring the internationally roving Skulk Lawrence.
He's a cop from South Africa. He's in his 50s. He's having a hard time in South Africa, and so he decides to come to visit his daughter in Sydney. And Skulk is like a lot of older white South Africans. He's trying to find his way in the new South Africa. He's not sure where he fits in. And so that's how he reflects his community. And he breaks that community by thinking, well, maybe he'll settle in Australia. So you'll have to read the book to find out whether he does. But the other main character is a woman called Jackie Rose. She's a Sydney detective. She's in her 40s. She's tough and she's smart and she's in your face. And at the moment, in this book, in Shadow City, she's very much part of the police community. She's a homicide detective.
Yeah, we met a bit of her father in your entry in Dark Deeds Down Under we spoke about earlier on the year.
That's right. Yeah. Well, in this book, it's more of her father and Jackie, and Jackie has to make some very hard decisions about where she belongs in the community in this book, which will come out next year.
Natalie Conyer, author of Shadow City, there, talking about the All Crime is Local panel that she was on. Now, when it comes to characters finding identities, it's really fascinating seeing how that evolves over the course of a novel and how authors are left to toy with these limited appearances, these little slices of life. And one of the unique opportunities we have in crime fiction is that so often we feature these characters' worst moments. Here's Hayley Scrivener, author of Girl Falling, as part of the Friends and Enemies panel.
I think the reason my first book took so long to write is that I kept wanting to keep everybody safe. And this is a genre where you actually promise the reader that nobody is safe. Both they're not safe from their own surroundings, but also perhaps the people you're spending time with are themselves not safe people to be around. And look, I feel really proud and lucky to be able to do that, but I also personally seek out a lot of really positive queer stories, and I think we should all coexist, and that it's almost progress to have the option, I think, rather than only being able to have positive representation.
The characters in Dirt Town are younger than the characters in Girl Falling, and I was kind of wondering if in your mind it's almost in some ways the same characters grown up.
I love that you say that. So Ronnie in my first book, Dirt Town, is a 12-year-old girl, and she was drawn so heavily from me. She's this chubby know-it-all. And I often think of Finn as Ronnie grown up, and that's because I've given her such a healthy chunk of myself, I think. So I love that you saw that connection, because I totally feel it too.
And it's interesting because one of these things about growing up is learning how your friends relate with your idea of self. And that speaks to me really well to the character Harriet in Nicola Moriarty's book, Every Last Suspect, who is one of the other panelists, and we spoke with her earlier in the year about that book. And in particular, the way that friends are the thing that drives Harriet to her worst impulses in some way.
Those kind of people that push you. Like you said, there's a comfort there. I guess a bit of the devil you know is a bit of that as well. And yeah, Harriet is the devil that you know, and you love her and love to hate her, I suppose.
One of the really strong currents of your book is people figuring out if they even can be friends, because we have a lot of the flashback sequences that deal with the parents at the school becoming part of this social group and the kind of turmoil that comes from that. You were talking in the panel about writing stories that your kids brought you. Is that what you see in the other parents at your kids' schools?
Sometimes, I hate to say it, but at times, more, not as much now because the kids are high school, so, parents aren't really as involved anymore. And sometimes I miss that as well because it's fun to meet new people. But yeah, I think when the kids started primary school, it was a bit of a shock to kind of see all the different cliques and things that existed back in high school.
Nicola Moriarty, author of Every Last Suspect, there, talking about the turmoil that her lead character, Harriet, both causes and is the victim of, sometimes both at the same time. But if you thought that Harriet's impulses were bad, just wait until you meet the cast of Candace Fox's heist novel, Devil's Kitchen. The really fun thing about it being a heist novel is that comes with an inherent social exercise, and I was really curious how Candace felt that changed her writing style.
Look, it was a challenge. I mean, the heist comes with a whole bunch of promises. You don't want to be reading about the upcoming heist that these characters are planning and think to yourself, I know exactly how it's going to go wrong. You know, you want to be looking at it and saying, to me, this is the best plan that I would come up with. I can't see any holes in it. But then, of course, it has to go wrong. It has to show skill and ingenuity in the characters that you can understand, but you're not necessarily clever enough to put together yourself, you know, something that they have gained from their own lives. And then you've got to have those double crosses and triple crosses which surprise you. So there's a lot of surprises that have to be baked in, and sitting there alone at a cafe or in your room with the laptop trying to be surprising is difficult, because you think, this isn't surprising to me, so I came up with it. So how do I know that people aren't going to see this coming? It's difficult. It's a really difficult genre, and one I would write again in a heartbeat.
That idea of trying to outsmart yourself, like create the perfect plan but then unravel it, is such a daunting idea.
Yeah. It's fun though. It's fun. And you have to get creative with it and vicarious with it and feel the pressure and get into the emotions of those characters, where they're in the jewelry store and they're pouring with sweat and it's all going down and they've been planning it for a year, and then something goes wrong, and you have to take a moment to walk the reader through their emotions and so that you can really feel it, but also have this heist unfold as fast as possible, so that the reader is flipping those pages. You know, it's great. It's so juicy, so fun to write.
Well, and also you were talking in the panel about the appeal of how friendships work in stories, and particularly this idea that struck me of how heists, where there are so many moving parts and so many of those moving parts are people, that there's an inherent social exercise in that.
In this case, it's 4 players on the board in this crew, and as you walk them up towards the heist, you're asking the reader to assess them as people and try to decide how reliable they're going to be, you know, in this criminal enterprise. And so in this novel, from the outset, I have the main character, Ben, saying to you, I cannot trust any of these guys, because Jake has a gambling problem, Ingo is a psycho, and Matt has one foot out of the game, you know. So you have to go into it thinking something is going to break down here. Is it going to be an external force, or is it going to be one of these guys, and which guy is it going to be and for what reason?
Well, and also that idea you were talking about of the common enemy and how that sort of appeals to male friendships, and then that idea that one of them will very quickly become the new common enemy.
Yeah. I love that. I have been in so many situations where I get to sit back and analyze a system, whether it's a workplace or a friendship group or a class or something where there's this structure. I was a high school teacher for a while, and that's where, in closed environments where emotions are high, like high schools, you watch public enemy number 1 is this kid on one day, and then suddenly something happens and you come back the next day and it's this kid instead, and this guy's the hero and this guy's not. And I just love that. And playing with that on the page is wonderful, because not only are you playing around in this sandpit and picking your own favourites, but you're trying to think, who's the favourite of the reader? Who are they rooting for, and how can I make them root for someone else?
Candace Fox there, author of Devil's Kitchen and more recently Highwire, talking about the way that characters and friendships play in as part of the Friends or Enemies panel at Bad Sydney. You are listening to Death of the Reader. We are talking about Bad Sydney this week on the show as part of our 2-part special on the festival this year. We'll be back with more in just a second. Stick around on your Murder Mystery World Tour. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. Any crime fiction fans getting to celebrate this wonderful community. And that is what we are going to close this episode talking about. Pretty much every author I had the opportunity to stick a microphone in front of, I asked about community, how it had impacted them, their writing, why it was worth being a part of, and what things they learned from it. So, with the deft hand of Cameron Furlong at the helm for the next few minutes, let's take you through some of the things that people cherish most about this incredible, weird, odd group of people who just love this genre.
I've celebrated the reality of being a crime writer. It's a fantastic community. Whenever we get together, we invariably talk about how nice we all are when we're writing about these heinous things that happen in real life. But the company is certainly very pleasant.
We're a smallish group, but we're incredibly supportive. We go to each other's launches and we're supportive of each other's books. And we phone each other to complain. But it's a very, very nice community to be in. You know, people talk about literary feuds and competition. Not like that at all.
When I did this, pivot to crime writing, suddenly I find myself in this incredible community that are incredibly supportive, go to each other's events. I know 10 times as many authors now as I have done in the last 18 years. It's quite extraordinary.
Writing as a passion and a profession is not a solitary act. It is an infusion of the connections and the sparks and the way you bounce off other crime writers.
Of course. I think that's the great thing about reading your contemporaries anyway, whether they're journalists or not journalists. I mean, you're always picking stuff up out of other people's books, and the wider you read, the better your writing gets, I always think.
Oh, it feels cool. It's fun because I leave here and I go home and I have a 5-year-old and I walk straight into this environment where it's like I'm one of the foot soldiers. I'm stepping on Lego and my kid's crying and I'm tired and there's washing everywhere and there's no rock star feelings in my life. So when I come to this thing and I have, debut authors or mid-career authors saying to me, can I just take you aside for a second and get some of your wisdom? I'm like, yes, child, let me tell you a tale. I do feel like a magical wizard. And I'm spewing out all my wisdom.
Oh, it's just, the ultimate buzz, isn't it? Early in my writing career before I got published, I mean, I'm have the opportunity to meet people that to me are absolute rock stars, and it's a strange privilege.
It's a strange one because I'm sort of very new to that. I'm obviously a debut novelist and this is my first festival of this scope, and I am just rubbing shoulders with all these people whose work I've loved forever and ever and ever. I've dealt with a lot, but never all in the one place like this, which is it's just so cool. It just makes you want to be a writer.
I mean, I think it's great. Everyone is really friendly. You read some of the text and you might expect people to be really dark and brooding, but everybody is light and inviting and happy to embrace it. And I think, I describe crime fiction as a broad church, and I think that's definitely the feeling you get here, where all kinds of crime fiction and all kinds of approaches to crime are welcome. So for me so far, it's been a fantastic experience.
I think just how broad the umbrella over crime fiction is, how many different ways people come at these stories, and I think there's so many different ways to attack that. It's, fascinating.
Thank you so much to all of the authors who participated in the Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival this year, but especially to our guests who took the chance to talk with me on the festival floor. We'll have a list of their names and links to their work up on the 2SER website to save you the time of me reading them all out yet again. A special thanks does have to go to Catherine de Palou-Menager, the artistic director of Bad Sydney, and DMCPR, the publicity team for the festival, for hooking us up with media tickets, welcoming us into the fold at Bad Sydney so that we had the opportunity to do this just amazing series of interviews that was such a delight to carry out. Also, a big thanks to all of the publishing houses who work with these authors. Regardless of whether or not they sent copies of books in, it's thanks to them that we have the opportunity to see them at these festivals and do these discussions. A massive shout out, of course, to Herds, my wisdom, my guiding North Star, and our editor Cameron Furlong for helping me put this episode all together. It has been several weeks of work, and I could not have done it without them. This is Death of the Reader, your Murder Mystery World Tour, here on 2SER 107.3. My name is Flex. We'll be back next week on the show with more crime fiction goodness. Thanks for joining us for this Bad Sydney double special. I'm out of here.